Hey everyone, so welcome back. So today we're going to be looking at a very well-known but unpopular document today. I almost guarantee you never hear about this document read about in Catholic churches today. That is the Syllabus of Errors. It is a must-read if you're a traditional Catholic, because essentially everything that's going on in the church today and everything that's going on in modern society today is essentially condemned in this work. Essentially all of it. So it condemns communism, it condemns pantheism, the modern ecumenical movement, and just defines it all as heretical. By the way, the Fundamentals of Catholic Dogma list this as an infallible document. So keep in mind, this is a pope by Pope Blessed Pius XI on a matter of faith and morals, because they talk about heresy, and he's condemning these things as being heretical in a way that it tends to bind the faithful. As in, this is heresy, I'm the Roman Pontiff, you cannot believe this. That would mean, even if there isn't a specific intention to infallibly define, this is protected by papal infallibility. So let's take a look at what the syllabus has to say. First of all, errors of pantheism, naturalism, and absolute rationalism. Quote, there exists no supreme, all-wise, provident, divine being. Essentially, no, you cannot be atheist. All action of God upon man, the world is to be denied. That is condemned. So think about in modern academia today, how people like saying, oh, I believe in God, but like everything's just God's hand is denied in everything. So that would be condemned. Human reason, and here's another one that will be unpopular. Human reason, without any reference whatsoever to God, is the sole arbitrator of truth and falsehood, and of good and evil. It is a law to itself, and it suffices by its natural force to secure the welfare of man and of nations. So think about today, how people say, oh, we need to have separation of church and state. Spoiler, that's going to be addressed way more directly a bit later. That is condemned. About when it comes to saying, well, the Bible says this, but I think this, and I think that it just doesn't make sense to me. That is condemned as modernism, as heresy by the Catholic Church. All the truths of religion proceed from innate strength of human reason, and reason is the ultimate standard of which man can and ought to arrive at the knowledge of all truths of every kind. This is condemned as well. So, again, I know other people who think that, and that religion is just an outgrowth of culture. I remember having a teacher in high school actually told me that. That's condemned. Divine revelation is imperfect. The Bible's not perfect. Therefore subject to continual and definite progress. Now, the Bible needs to get up with the times. The church should change its teaching. The church should just change its teachings, and women priests and stuff like that. Yeah, that's heresy. Explicitly condemned. The faith in Christ is in opposition to human reason. Divine revelation not only is not useful, but is even hurtful to the perfection of man. Like, we need to get those Christians out of the way and put your Christianity aside for the good of common man. That is, again, condemned. Okay, this is number 7. I actually know a priest who committed this heresy. The quote, the prophecies and miracles set forth in the recorded scriptures are the fiction of poets, and the mysteries of Christian faith result in philosophical investigations. The books of the Old and New Testaments are contained in mythical inventions, and Jesus Christ himself is a myth. So, I remember hearing of a Novus Ordo priest. My mother was playing at a Catholic church at the time. She's Protestant. She told me, well, this is what the priest said, that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob did not exist, and that these are fictitious figures. Yeah, that kind of goes against this. That's condemned heresy. Or that, Jesus Christ just figured out men really arrived at God on their own, and God didn't reveal anything. Yeah, condemned. And by the way, and Jesus Christ himself is a myth. Like, okay, I don't even think many atheists themselves believe in that anymore. That is pretty niche. Modern rationalism. As human reason is placed on a level with religion itself, it's not. So theological must be treated in the same manner as philosophical sciences. So, no, theology and science are not the same. God's law is above human reason. All the dogmas of Christian religion are indiscriminately the object of natural science and philosophy. Again, this is the whole science is above faith sort of deal, which again is heresy. Human reason enlightened solely in a historical way. So basically, you can judge theology without reference to God as such. The most unnatural strength and principles to attain to the true science of being the most abstruse dogma. So basically, it's the idea that you can judge a religion based on natural science alone and get a proper understanding of it, and if it's true or right or wrong or not. That is not true. As a philosopher is one thing and the philosopher another, so it is right and duty of a philosopher to subject himself to the authority which he shall have proved to be true. But philosophy neither can nor ought to be submit to any such authority. So again, here we are saying, here the modernists are saying, in this one, that, religion must be subject to philosophy. And number 10, the philosophers are saying that, philosophy is not to be subject to the church and the Catholic teaching of God in the church. God's law is subject to philosophy. Okay, both of those are condemned. The church never passed judgment on philosophy, but ought to tolerate the errors of philosophy, leaving it to correct itself. So again, I know people who think like this, like basically the church and church teaching in the Bible the Christians need to step away from their theology, from the philosophers, and modern thinkers do their thinking. And I hate to say this, but a lot of even so-called traditional Catholics do this one. I'm not attacking anyone, but it is just the society we live in. Remember, again, just about everything condemned in here is everything condemned in the Syllabus of Errors is what modern society is doing today, essentially. So think about Republicans or Democrats, or liberals, conservatives in the States, or liberals, conservatives in Canada. The church not only never passed. I know so many people say, the church teaches this, but in practical terms, I need to be Republican. The economy is the main thing, and I know the church condemns it, but they in practice reduce this condemnation to nothing. And I'm picking on the Republicans because Republicans at least pretend that they're not doing that when they actually are. I don't even think leftists even pretend they're not doing it. They openly admit it. Number 12, the decrees apostolic and the Roman congregations impede the true progress of science. Yeah, I know a lot of people say, the church's teaching condemns science. You get that attitude so much. Surprisingly, I go to university. I've been at secular universities, and honestly, this is a very start of your education heresy. A lot of people at my university have actually said, when it comes to matters of philosophy and science, etc., the Catholic Church has actually done quite a bit of good. Even atheists and secular scholars who are actually PhDs, educated, and not just so obsessed with wokeness to the point where it's completely absurd. Even a lot of woke professors will say, the pre-apostolic see and the Roman congregation impede the true progress of science. Basically, anyone who is not outright trying to, today in my experience, anyone who's not outright trying to attack the Catholic Church and use academia for no other purpose than that will call this garbage. Essentially, they won't call it garbage, they call it something else, but I prefer to be a little more polite. 13. The method and principles of which the old scholastic galactic doctors cultivated theology are no longer suitable to the demands of our times, progress of the sciences. Again, basically, scholastic philosophy is still valid. Philosophy is to be treated without taking into account supernatural revelation. Yeah, this is condemned and would only make sense to believe in if you're an atheist who's just LARPing as a Christian. If there is God, he has spoken, he has revealed things. Do you think God might know better than you? Just a crazy chance, I remember chatting with a professor who he was correcting something about correcting them about how comparative religion as a discipline works. I think it was mainly saying, like, comparative religion does not use the term cult anymore. They just use the term new religious movement, because, like, there's no universally agreed on definition of it, and they don't find it that useful. And they were trying to argue, no, cult's the real thing, cult's the real thing. And even though the professor tells them no, after being told, they think it's complete. They go on. They still go at it. So that's essentially like God. And clinging to that ridiculous notion and not listening to professor is kind of like people who believe this are doing. And again, I have a friend, not calling him out by name, but he is a Mormon. He says they don't believe the Bible, and some of us don't think the prophet gets this right. Well, you think he's a prophet in the LDS Church? Yes. Well, it's hypocrite. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous hypocrisy. And same thing. Like I'm a traditional Catholic. I believe in Scripture and tradition. It did not get anything wrong in Scripture or tradition, because philosophy is great. It is useful. But when God bumps you on the head, God corrects philosophy. Why? Because God is the source of all knowledge. With philosophy, we're trying to figure things out ourselves. When we get divine revelation, God is creating our philosophical work. Essentially, we should accept the grade because we have an infallible grader. Indifferentism. Oh yeah. So by the way, spoiler, this one's going to be important. This section here, literally everything Western society is today contradicts this. We as Catholics need to embrace what the Church teaches, and I've heard a lot of Americans say that they love Vatican II and they hate traditional Catholicism because being traditional Catholic is un-American, and they are correct. And this section here proves it. So remember in the United States Constitution, if you're an American watching this, which says, the state shall not decree that any one religion is true or the other, etc. That, and at the federal level, well, guess what? That's condemned. Every man is free to embrace and profess their religion, which guided by the light of reason he shall consider true. Yeah, that number 15 of the Syllabus of Errors, condemned. So that definitely goes against the American Constitution when it comes to separation from church and state and religious freedom, because this implies that the state can say, no, you're not free to practice whatever religion you want. And to modernists who think everyone's going to heaven regardless of what they believe. Hey, I have a Protestant family. I love them. Not favor being violent or cruel or any which way. But here's another thing. Condemned. Number 16. Man in the observance of any religion, whatever, find the way of eternal salvation, arrive at eternal salvation. That is condemned as heresy. Jesus Christ, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to Father but by me. Hear who hears me. John 6:68. Jesus turned away people because they would not accept transubstantiation. Outside of the traditional Catholic faith, there is no salvation. Even Novus and Catholics, because they believe in heresies, are not saved. And people say, well, we know we can never really understand what hope is at the last moment of someone's life. Yeah, the next condemnation deals with that. Number 17. Good hope, at least, is to be entertained of the eternal salvation of those who are not at all in the true Church of Christ. So, 16, 17, 16. You can't find in your salvation in any religion except Christianity, and you can't find it in any form of Christianity. It has to be the big C Catholic Church, i.e. traditional Catholicism. Modernism and heresy, if you embrace heresy, you're a heretic, you're not in part of the church. And no, you can't have great hope that these people are saved if they do not convert before the end of their lives. That is, both are condemned as heresies. And in case you're wondering, well, the Protestants are nice, maybe it's just referring to Christianity in general. Yeah, 18 deals with that too. Condemned. Protestantism is nothing more than another form of the same true Christian religion, which form it is given to please God equally as in the Catholic Church. Condemned. So, 18. So again, this section here on differentism. Protestantism is not a path to salvation. It is a false religion. You cannot find your way through that salvation if you follow the false religion. That's number 16. Number 17, no, you cannot just presume that these people are going to be saved by miracle grace of end of life and have great hope in them. And number 15, yes, the state should get involved, and people ideally should not be allowed to make false belief, run wild with their falsehoods. The state should get involved. Number 4. Socialism, communism, secret societies, and biblical societies. Quote, pests of this kind are frequently reprobated in the severest terms in the encyclical Qui Pluribus, and list some other encyclicals as well. There's just so many things to say against them. Yeah, just don't do them. So I know on this channel I go against capitalism quite a bit, because capitalism in its current form is not in line with Catholic teaching. That being said, I do want to be clear, like, I am very much aware, genuine socialism, genuine communism. And when I say genuine socialism and genuine communism, I do mean socialism, communism. There's some Americans who label everything they do not like as being communist, and I want to be clear that I am not with them. That being said, like, communism like, China is a communist country. That's not good. And I'm going to make another encyclical do another encyclical overview of condemnation of communism. But communism and socialism in its softer form is condemned. As not respecting, I hate to sound like a risk, sounding like a conservative American commentator crank. Yes, private property is very much a thing in Catholic teaching, and it should be respected. And if you read Rerum Novarum, attempts to make everyone equal through taxation, etc., is taken as being condemned. That is one extreme of you can take it. Capitalism takes it to the other, especially in the United States, in my view, and I definitely do think a lot more should be done. I believe Catholic teaching supports that to help people lift themselves up, to help provide a better social safety net, better opportunities, etc. But full-on communism, socialism is bad from a Catholic standpoint. Secret societies, largely talk about Freemasonry, but other groups, even some nationalistic groups, like the Fenians, basically groups that were trying to overthrow the governments. The idea that you're allowed to overthrow governments is very not looked favorably on in a Catholic teaching. So, you have to read the Syllabus of Errors, read the Papal Bull condemning Freemasonry, read about decrees condemning communism. Rerum Novarum itself. If you look at other societies, aside from Freemasonry, and Freemasonry, by the way, is condemned for doctrinal errors, but even aside from that, it, along with numerous other secret societies, if you have part of a group that's trying to gather together and overthrow the government and thinks that's a good idea, it is probably a non-Catholic thing. Biblical societies. Now, I know a lot of Protestants are going to be mad at why this is being lifted up, as well as clerical liberal societies. Okay, so I'm going to comment on these two things. First, I'll comment on clerical liberal societies. I find the Catholic world, as a convert, I find people either worship priests, which I definitely am against. I'm definitely against worshiping the priest. In some ways, I don't mean literally worship, but they believe more in Father so and so than in the Catholic faith, and you need to. And I agree that's not good. That being said, what people try to replace it with is a hatred of the priesthood, an expulsion of not just priests but the Catholic faith from society, and laicization of parishes, etc., none of which are good. Again, I've not read these decrees myself, but just from things I've seen among leftist Catholics, I think I get a general idea of what they're talking about. But again, if someone knows more details about this, I probably should and will read these decrees later on. But yeah, biblical societies. Why would that be condemned? First of all, the Catholic Church does not condemn you from reading the Bible. It's not prohibited. And indeed, there's actually indulgences attached to reading the Bible for 15 minutes every day. However, a lot of Bible societies try to urge a lot of Bible societies are run by Protestants, which try to urge Catholics away from the Catholic faith. B, promote heretical translations of Scripture, which exclude, certainly when the case of the Old Testament is concerned, numerous passages of Scripture, or will intentionally twist Greek words into so that they don't sound as Catholic. So, for example, in I believe 1st or 2nd Timothy, it talks about a role in Greek called the episkopos, which in the Catholic Church is referred to as bishop, which is a legitimate translation, but that's what it means. Overseer does imply you're overseeing everything and have authority, but a lot of Protestant translations, notably the King James, will interpret it as overseer rather than bishop, try to decatholicize it. And essentially that it is what it is talking about. Number 5, errors concerning the Church and her rights. Quote, the Church, not a true and perfect society, entirely free, nor is she endowed with proper and perpetual rights of her own, conferred on her by divine founder. But it pertains still power to define what are the rights of the Church and limits in which she may exercise those rights. Essentially, it condemns the idea that it condemns the idea that the state is above the Church. Now, especially in Western society today, this is a shocking thing, but like I said everyone's going to get some shock about this. It's just the society we live in. And we have to watch ourselves about this. But let me explain it in a way that even a lot of non-Catholics could accept. Let's say you live in, this is an extreme case, in a dictatorship like the People's Republic of China or North Korea. Basically, in an extreme case of someone hearing to this, we would say, no, North Korea, condemning this would mean that no, North Korea cannot say the Church cannot go in and send missionaries to look after people's souls. No, the civil power may not say we cannot give people last rights because for such and such a reason. Now, because of the society we live in, especially during the pandemic, I saw this. I saw two extremes on this one. One extreme was essentially a lot of civil authorities were trying to shut down churches, and I don't just mean working with them so that they could find ways to operate and not spread the plague, but I mean full-on shut down churches, etc. And there were priests, traditional and otherwise, who said, no, I'm going to at least this has to be, I'm going to at least hear people's confessions, give them a communion of the tongue, discreetly, quietly, still try to take as many precautions as they can, which is what you're supposed to do when you're doing resisting an authority figure, and there's abuse of power, do the minimum amount required. That being said, if you look at the decree of Freemasonry, spoiler, some people were trying to abuse that to the extent where, it wasn't just churches. You got some random Catholics saying, well, I'm part of the church, therefore I don't need to obey the civil law myself in other matters on lockdowns, which actually they do. You're not permitted to just overthrow the government. You're simply not permitted to do that. And I think, if I recall correctly, it does talk about that right of civil authority. Syllabus of Errors condemns both extremes, if I recall correctly. But I know that the decree on Freemasonry does talk about how civil authority does have rights over individuals. Quote, the ecclesiastic power are not to exercise its authority without the permission and assent of the civil government. Henry VIII condemned. The Chinese Catholic Association by the government, Communist China, is condemned. Quote, the Church has not the power of dogmatically defining. The church has not the power of defining dogmatically that the religion of the Catholic Church is the only true religion. Yes, it does, and yes, it did. Outside the church, there's no salvation. Another decree I'll probably read later will be the decree Unum Sanctum, which is actually much shorter than this. The older papal decrees get, the older, simpler of a read they are. 22. The obligation by which Catholic teachers and authors strictly bound is confined to those things only which are proposed to universal belief as dogmas of the faith by infallible judgment of the Church. No, like, you are obliged to obey church teaching and other matters. You are to err on the side of caution. 23. Roman pontiffs and ecumenical councils have wandered outside the limits of their powers. Have usurped the rights of princes. They even erred in defining matters of faith and morals. Like, yeah, like, can you even be, like, I can just imagine when Christ said, so just a little commentary. When the Bible Gospel where it said Christ, before he said in heaven, said, "Go teach all nations," unless the king doesn't want you there, then don't do it. If that was if they had obeyed that law, and that's like most of what the church does, the church would have never left the upper room. They've not usurped the right of princes, and have erred in defining matters of faith and morals. Never mind papal infallibility. If that's the case, that you're essentially saying the whole church is an error. And even as Tracast, we'd say for 2,000 years, consistent teaching, no, we haven't. And by the way, if you have studied church history and church teaching, it's pretty consistent over the centuries, actually. But we know we're free to do whatever we want. Number 24, the church has no power of using force, nor has she any temporal power, direct or indirect. In other words, yes, the church can use force. I know, like, this is not a freedom document. And like I always said, if you worship freedom as your God, like a lot of Americans do, you conservative Americans, you are contradicting the Catholic faith. You cannot believe in this. Besides the power inherent in the episcopate, other temporal power has been attributed to it by the civil authority, granted either explicitly or tacitly, which on account of it is revocable by the civil authority whenever it thinks fit. No, it hasn't. Church has no innate and legitimate right of acquiring, possessing property. Yes, it does. Church can own property. The sacred ministers of the church and Roman pontiff are absolutely excluded from every charge and dominion over temporal affairs. Thank goodness they haven't. They haven't. Like, especially if you look at the abolition of slave trade, do you realize how the Roman pontiff, and even at the risk of giving a shout out to some Protestants, Catholics and even Protestant Christians have played a huge role in abolishing things like the slave trade and having like bare minimum human rights. When I mean human rights, I mean, this extra child is a drain on our property, but you just abandon it in the woods. The church said, no, you can't do that. Thank goodness it interfered and said, no, we have a right over this temporal affair, you can't do that. It is not lawful for bishops to publish even letters apostolic without permission of government. Okay, now you're talking government worship at this point. Like, never mind the church. These people are not talking church separation of church and state, but they literally want the state to dominate the church. I actually remember hearing something like that happening in the United States a few years ago, where I think there was a mayor in the United States who wanted all the local pastors to submit their sermons to her for overview before they gave them. For favors granted by the Roman Pontiff ought to be considered null, unless they've been sought for through the civil government. Yeah, like, I can just imagine, like, the Apostle Peter or the early church in the first 3 centuries appointing bishops during a persecution, but having to go through Trajan Diocletian for permission to do that. Like, and, like, does anyone seriously think that keeping themselves alive would have been wrong? You'd have to be ridiculous. The unity of the church and ecclesiastical persons derives its origin from civil law. Church authorities basically, so this would be a controversial thing, especially in light of the abuse cases in the church. Basically, you cannot charge an ecclesiastical person under normal circumstances. I know, post-Vatican, I'll say this, I have read a while, it's been a while, but I have read the Code of Canon Law in this regard, and it gives a preference to keeping things in-house. Again, think about situations like Communist China would be an obvious situation where it might be problematic, because if you go before that magistrate, they might just arrest everyone for being Catholic at all, and you get a problem. That being said, I remember reading some of the ecumenical councils, which I need to do, read all of them. It was on my bucket list. But there was a time when towards the late Roman Empire, when officially the Roman Empire became Christian, but they were trying to control the church by essentially arresting priests on trumped-up charges and bishops on trumped-up charges. So that's when you really started seeing decrees saying, you know what, under divine law, we have this canon. You come to we're going to deal with these ecclesiastical persons are to be tried by ecclesiastical courts. Largely because we just don't want the government using courts to round up priests who criticized it and throw them in jail, essentially, which is a pretty reasonable thing. That being said, as well known, it has been horribly abused over the centuries. And a lot of people would say just round up a bad priest and just, we don't care anymore. Even a lot of traditional Catholics have said, look, we want abusive priests to just be thrown in jail. Don't care, lock them away the key. The church has had its chance. And I think under Vatican II's Code of Canon Law, I haven't read the entire new old code, but under the post-Vatican II code, which I've actually heard, it said that it is one of the least worst things that came out of Vatican II, was the new Code of Canon Law. It does say if you cannot get justice through ecclesiastical authority, the new Code of Canon Law, recognized by the SSPX, I might add, as being legitimate, something you can legitimately observe and try to observe, does allow you to go to civil law. Yeah, for some reason you cannot get justice through ecclesiastical courts, for the record. But that's its origin, and it comes from divine law. It comes from divine law. For obvious reasons, again, because you don't want, Communist China rounding up an entire church because one priest broke a law, and so we say it's natural that the church can deal with it legitimately in-house. Number 31. The ecclesiastical form of tribunal for the temple causes, whether civil or criminal, clerics ought by all means be abolished, even without protesting against the Holy See. Fun fact, there were ecclesiastical courts where clerics could have been imprisoned. I know it's in some ways separation of church and state made ecclesiastical punishments less severe. Because back in the day, they could literally throw an abusive, immoral priest in jail for the remainder of his life and banish him to a monastery. I think there are cases where something like this is done today, but it's done more on an honor basis. I think it's called ecclesiastical prison. SSPX has it, and it's still done in some extent, where they say, okay, you're priest, you suck, you did this horrible thing. You can be a priest, but we're banishing you to this monastery in the middle of nowhere. You're not going to be around kids or anything like that anymore. You're not in a position to abuse anyone again. It's going to be a life of penance for the remainder of your life. And that was what was done. In some ways still done, but today it's done on a more voluntary basis, usually by sinful lay priests who do want help. Back in the day, they could just say, we don't care if you want to go or not, you're just going. The personal immunity by which clerics are exonerated from military conscription, service in the army may be abolished without violation either of natural rights or equity. Its abolition is called for by civil process, especially in a society framed by the model of a liberal government. So basically, we don't care if you're a priest looking after the care of souls of millions. We can just round you up and make you join the army, whether you like it or not. I don't think in this day and age, most people would be against the Catholic Church, saying we don't want our priests, who we're putting in charge of looking after 1,000 souls, running local charities, etc., to be rounded up and put into an army against their will. I think a lot of people are against conscription today, just in general. In most governments, there are only a few countries where they still have a conscription. Have conscription. And even then, it's like there are certain positions where they would consider it essentially a state hero. And Catholic Church is just saying, we think priests should be one of them. Which, again, I don't think that would be too controversial today, most places. It is not appertain exclusively to the power of ecclesiastical jurisdiction by right, proper and ancient, to direct the teaching of theological questions. Then who does it belong to? Oh yes, the civil authority who's headed by someone who doesn't even believe in the religion. Of course. Number 34, the teaching of those who compare the sovereign pontiff to a prince, free and acting in the universal church, is a doctrine travailed in the Middle Ages. He is in charge of the universal church. The church was founded by Jesus Christ. For the first 3 centuries, the Roman pontiff definitely did not ask permission from Diocletian or Marcus Aurelius or any of the other persecutors of the church for permission to act as pope. And yes, I've read the early writings of the early church fathers, notably Against Heresies by Irenaeus of Lyons. They absolutely did believe in a sovereign Roman pontiff. There is nothing to prevent the decree of a general council or act of all peoples from transferring the supreme pontificate from the bishop city of Rome to the bishop of another city. Except like the fact that the early church fathers literally say the reason Rome is the successor of St. Peter is because it is the see of Peter, and that is why it has the primacy over other churches. That's literally the reasoning of St. Irenaeus of Lyons' work Against Heresies. The definition of a national council does not admit to any subsequent discussion. Civil authority can assume this principle as the basis of its acts. This heresy reminds me of a woman who said she would join the United Church of Canada. Why? And that was better than the Catholic Church. Why? Because it was a Canadian church. My response, wasn't where the apostles went to Canada? Was it where that Jesus Christ, when he walked this earth, went to Canada? Like, I'm a nationalist. I love Canada too. And my gosh, Americans, butt out of our business if you're watching this. That being said, like, do I think the decree of the local council of Catholic bishops is universal and binding over the whole world? No. Like, that's ridiculous. It's about divine law, divine authority. And, like, I don't recall Jesus telling the apostles, you are Peter upon this rock, build my church, and the gates will not prevail against it. But state of Thomas's business, and the bishops he sets up in India are to work things out for India, doctrinally, morally, liturgically, and yeah, I think Bartholomew is going to go over to Armenia. He's going to do this. Stay out of Armenia's business, and the national bishops discuss things there. You're just kind of a figurehead, really, Peter. Like, yeah, that was not in the Bible. Just saying. National churches withdrawn from authority of the Roman pontiff and altogether separated can be established. You're Peter, and upon this rock will build my church. The gates of hell will not prevail against it. But you other apostles, if you find Peter annoying, just go do your own thing. Yeah, that is not in the Bible either. 38. Roman pontiffs, by their too arbitrary conduct, contributed to the division of the churches into Eastern and Western. Yeah, I actually was examining the Great Western Schism. First of all, the authority of the Pope as having universal authority over the church and its supremacy as being supremacy of authority is talked about in the Church Fathers. I plan on making another YouTube on that topic in the future. Secondly, it was essentially the Patriarch of Constantinople. I forget his name from 1,000 years ago. He wanted essentially to be like mini pope in his own area. It was about him it was trying to flex his power too much because he was obsessed with himself. That was kind of the origin of Great Western Schism. That was essentially it. Number 6, errors about civil society, considered both in itself and in relation to the church. The state being the origin and source of all rights is endowed with a certain right not subscribed by any limits. So, we've condemned excessive freedom cult, but you'll be happy to know that fascism is essentially condemned in this. As the state is not the end in of itself for everything. And the state does have limits to its authority. And there are rights which come from God, which cannot be taken away. Like, I think the American Constitution definitely gives way more rights than God gave, and falsely claims that God gave those rights when really they were made by man. But there are rights that God did give us that are inalienable, and the civil rights and fascism and is condemned, and we do have civil rights. Number 40. The teaching of the Catholic Church is hostile to the well-being of society, being and interest of society. Yeah, you get that's a lot, especially where I would live, where a lot of the local values are very contrary to traditional Catholic teaching. Won't go into it, but yeah, it's really bad. No, disobeying society and driving it into literal HELL is what's bad. Number 41. Civil government, even in the hands of an infidel sovereign, has the right to an indirect negative power over religious affairs. Therefore, this is not only the right called ex curriba, called appellio ab ipso. Essentially, that forgive me for butchering the Latin, but essentially it's essentially state worship, saying that the state can butt its head into a church's affairs, even on theological matters, even on purely religious matters, as a matter of divine right. This theologically, why this would be messed up and bad to anyone who's not completely worshiping their government or their nationalism would be brutally obvious. This section seems to be essentially, if you're condemning fascism, this is your section if you hate fascism, from what I can tell so far. The case affecting laws enacted by the two powers, the civil law prevails. So you have a conflict between church law and civil law. In truth, it's the church laws that prevails. It's divine law that prevails. I know a lot of people get mad at this. Oh, how dare you say that the government, the church can go in and tell the government what to do. Oh, you're overthrowing national sovereignty. Well, actually I'm going to point out a bit of American history here for something that Americans did do right, albeit they were Protestants, but they had the right idea and didn't obey this. I remember reading Uncle Tom's Cabin, where there was a story where there was a slave escaping from the south going north, and they were heading to this man's house, and this man happened to be a member of Congress, and he was arguing with his wife because he had supported he had supported an act saying that you have to return slaves to their owners down south if they flee north. His wife said, no, you know what? That might be the civil law, but God's law prevails. I'm going to go with God's law. And eventually what happened, and God's law says if someone is in need, is coming to me, I'm going to do what God wants. I don't care what civil law says. And eventually that slave got there, and the congressman, hypocritically but rightly, helped that slave woman and her child escape. It definitely read Uncle Tom's Cabin, by the way. Number 43. The secular dower has authority to rescind, declare, and render null the solemn conventions commonly called concordance. That's like a treaty between the church as a civil church and a secular government on matters that deals both. So, for example, religious schools. both a secular government would have concern in that regard, as would the church, entered into the apostolic see. Regarding the use of the rights appertaining to ecclesiastical immunity without the consent of the apostolic see, even in spite of its protest. So basically, you can just ignore these decrees no matter what. Essentially, ignoring concordance no matter what is. Yeah, don't do that. That's a garbage thing to do. Like, honestly, most concordants are actually pretty sane. Like, 43. The civil authority may interfere in matters of religion. Again, like, it's like these secularists, the people the modernists are condemning, they want the church to basically be stomped on. Even in matters in the church. Religion, morality, and spiritual government. So basically, and I see this with Americans all the time, especially so-called American Christians. Like, I've ever seen the nerdy Christian, he's on Instagram. He's saying the separation of church and state is immorality. It's something that's just taught at home, etc., etc. No, it's something that it's something that the state needs to obey. That's been historically what's been done throughout most of the Christian world. And here's the thing, like, when you have government in schools, I remember sitting through, I dropped out, it wasn't for me, but I remember sitting through a political science course one time, and one thing we learned is that politics are all about values. Religion, morality, and spiritual government. How is that not the same thing? But that's why you can't have separation of church and state, realistically. Because you cannot have two conflicting codes of morals. Hence, you can pass judgment on the instructions issued for the guidance of consciences. Certain sins against nature, like between two men, for example, the Catholic Church teaches that's wrong. This saying that the people who are arguing for this, saying the civil authority could come and say, we say that's wrong. If you preach against this, we'll throw you in jail. And that they can do this conformably with their mission by the pastors of the church. Further, it has the right to make enactments regarding the administration of the divine sacraments and the dispositions necessary for receiving them. Basically, this government can tell the church, no, you have to give this person Holy Communion, even if you excommunicate them. We're telling you to do that. It's a very draconian, and anyone who thinks about the early church and church history, what was done in the early church, yeah, this would not have been done in the early church. The civil authority did interfere in matters of religion in the early church, though, usually by trying to stomp it out, the Christian religion, and imposing pagan morality and a pagan spiritual government, and the early church's response was to tell them to bug off. And basically choose death rather than let that happen and do what the civil society wanted. So, that's essentially saying the 44 persecutors of the early church were right. Essentially is what that error teaches in a certain sense. 45. The entire government of public schools in which the youth of a Christian state is educated, except to a certain extent, in case of Episcopal seminaries, may and ought to appertain to the civil power, belong to it insofar that no other authority whatsoever shall be recognized as having any right to interfere in the discipline of the schools, the arrangement of studies, the conferring of degrees, and the choice and approval of teachers. Basically, get the church out of business of having schools for kids. Like, don't get me wrong, public education has largely been a blessing. That being said, the expulsion of Christian morality and the church in general from schools has been a bad thing. Look, if you look at most universities in your area, they were essentially founded by churches. Like, even where I live, just about every university, whether Catholic or non-Catholic, was founded by the church, by a church of some sort. So it's not like a matter of the church isn't supporting education. Like, it absolutely is supporting advanced education. Something that I would remind a lot of Trads today, like, you can't have a degree. Be a good Trad, Cath. I definitely encourage Tradcasts to do that. But the idea that, like, not having the church involved or Christian morality involved in schools is a good thing is absurd. We should get rid of that. Ideally, the church should be heavily involved in education, as an ideal, something we should hopefully have again someday. 46. Moreover, even ecclesiastical seminaries' method of studies to be adopted is subject to civil authority. We know we're the priests. We're priests. We know what required to be a priest better than an atheistic Freemason who's never been a priest. Again, this is how ridiculous it is to be. Number 47. The best theory of civil society requires that popular schools open children of every class of people and generally all public institutes intended for instruction in letters, philosophical science, and for carrying out the education of youth should be freed from all ecclesiastical authority. By the way, this is not saying we need to have these schools. These schools were already existed since the Middle Ages, by the way. What they're saying is they don't want the church involved in it at all. Control interference. They should be fully subject to the civil and political power at the pleasure of the rulers and according to the standard of the prevalent opinions of the age. It's basically go with the times and church and butt out of it. Yeah, so this is essentially, this condemned as heresy. Like, we don't want religious. This is literally, we're fascists, we're ultranationalists. Again, this whole section is like a condemnation of fascists / ultranationalists, which a lot of conservative Catholics sadly tend to forget is condemned by the church and has been historically an enemy of the church before wokeism was. The Catholic churches were the original anti-fascists. And just because fascists are not necessarily woke doesn't mean we shouldn't be going after this secularist, nationalistic, pagan nonsense. 48. Catholics may approve of the system of educating youth unconnected with the Catholic faith, and the power of the church which regards the knowledge of merely natural things, only at least partially the ends of early social life. I know a lot of Catholic parents, so-called Catholic parents in modern Oslo classes who believe in this error. They once a week put their kids in a garbage, poorly prepared catechism class. Do not teach their kids anything at school or at home, and it's honestly should education be part of the education? Should religion be part of the education system? Yeah, especially for someone who is a Catholic. Oh, but that's tyranny. You have to read the Bible. Like, yeah, read the Bible. Oh, you have to learn about the Catholic faith. Yeah, learn about the Catholic faith. This proves to only people, like, a lot of that you're seeing here is only appearing to people, would only appeal to people who have they're framing that they just hate the Catholic Church and they're just trying to, like, frame it as progress. Really, they just hate religion, essentially, and that's it. Civil power may prevent the prelates of the church and the faithful from communicating freely mutually with the Roman pontiff. Like, okay, you're kind of getting you're starting to, like, get this, the theme of this section of, like, I'm nationalist, I'm wonderful, state is amazing, I hate church for getting in my way. These are, like, that's essentially these errors. Lay authority possesses of itself the right of presenting bishops and inquire of them to undertake the administration of the diocese for the received canonical institution and letters apostolic from the Holy See. Essentially, this whole section is like, again, I am fascist. I am nation. Government is God. How dare the church get in the way of me interfering in literally matters in the church? How dare it even comment on me saying I cannot take away everyone's most remote human rights and crush them beneath my feet? That is essentially this whole section. Oh, so tyrannical of the Catholic Church. Oh, so tyrannical. And further, the lay government has the right of disposing bishops from their pastoral functions and is bound to pay their own pontiff those things which relate to institutions of bishops and appointment of bishops. Essentially, we control the church. We will crush you. How dare you criticize us? And we control religion. We control everything. How dare you interfere? It's like literally government worship. Like, essentially, like, if you're watching this and you're... if you're watching this, hopefully, like, you do get that it's literally state fascism and government worship. Government by its own right, alter the age prescribed by the church for religious profession of women and men, and may require that all religious orders to admit no person to take some vows without permission. So, like, yeah, literally, we decide if you're called to be a priest, or, and this actually is happening in Turkey right now, where I think they banned the Patriarch of Constantinople from training priests at all. That's the Greek Orthodox thing. It's in Turkey, but that is what is happening right now. Again, I think we know how the early church handled this. So, government, go bye-bye. God's law comes first. Especially the laws enacted for the protection of religious orders and regarding the rights and duties ought to be abolished. Nay, more, civil government may lend its assistance to those desire to renounce obligation which they have undertaken a religious life to break their vows. Government may also suppress the said religious orders, as likewise collegiate churches and simple benefices, even those avowed and subject to property and revenues for administration, pleasure of the administration and pleasure of the civil power. Essentially, like, yeah, we'll tolerate you, the church, we control you, and like no one's obliged to listen to you. Essentially, God's law, God's church, they want off the side. But this is not to give people freedom, because remember, this is not about giving people freedom. Because remember, Error 39, the state as being the origin and source of all rights is endowed with a certain right, not circumscribed by any limits. They oppose people having commitment to the church because it means that it limits how much commitment someone can give to them. For kings and princes not only exempt from the jurisdiction of the church, but are superior to the church, citing questions of jurisdiction. So, yeah, so essentially, I don't have to listen to the church when it tells me what to do. Yeah, so essentially, the church, for example, this would mean that the Catholic Church cannot say Hitler was wrong to put people in concentration camps. Not that, Pius XII should have done so. This error would essentially say that the church has no business in even criticizing him or telling him he's wrong. That Hitler would be superior to the church, essentially. Same thing with the Stalin and the gulags, or a king who, like, or civil authority that wants to oppress its workers in a mill and work them 12 hours a day. The church cannot tell them they're wrong, and they have a right to fire and sack any bishop or leader of the church who tells them that they're wrong. That is essentially what this error is saying. Number 55. And this is, you know how they say separation of church and state is the foundation of American society? Well, number 55, error condemned. The church ought to be separated from the state and the state from the church. Error number 55. Separation of church and state as it is contrary to the Catholic faith. If you say, I believe in the separation of church and state, you commit yourself a heretic. And, by the way, that's historically is not a new innovation by Pius IX, this decree, to condemn it. The church has always been involved in state, and the church have always worked together. That's always how it's supposed to have been worked. The state always was concerned about its spiritual welfare. A lot of Europe converted because the king thought it a good idea to sponsor the church in its evangelistic efforts and missionary activity in Syria. That's how England became converted. That's Armenia under Tyrannus III, who did way more than just sponsor some missionaries. He insisted the whole country convert with him. Same thing with St. Vladimir the Great in Russia. And guess what? They were successful in saving millions of souls. And yes, and sorry to trigger any Americans, but the church and God's law came before the American Constitution, and sorry, does trump the American Constitution or Declaration of Independence or anything else that may have been written. You cannot, as a Catholic, believe in the separation of church and state. That is not what Moses believed, and it was not changed in the new law. And again, I'm going to make another video on that topic in more detail at a later date, but I'll just leave it here for now. Number 7, errors concerning natural and Christian ethics. Moral laws do not stand in need of divine sanction. It is not at all necessary that human laws should be made conformable to laws of nature and see the power and binding from God. Yeah, the problem with this is that they do. Like, I think we've seen in recent years that, yeah, if there isn't a divine lawgiver, there is no objective code of morality. Like, I've seen a lot of atheists argue that you can have objective system morality, but it is but what happens is that you end up with different cultures, different values, and they have contradictory values. And they can all, and they're not all, they're not equally valid. Why? If morals just come out of human society alone, then that society can decide whatever it wants is good. And you've got to have had societies that have decided that human sacrifice is okay. And every injustice of the church, for example, that people claim was at some level, by a certain section of human society at least, perceived as being okay. So even if you want to condemn the church, you need a God who is above the church, and as well as above you and everything, to say that what happened was wrong. You need a lawgiver that says that. It's philosophically doesn't make sense. And it's actually always said it's one of the what arguments of God is wrong. Well, whose law says that? Where did you get that code of morality from? Well, we just think it's naturally. Like, why? It's something that a lot of atheists don't think, because they measure everything by the standard of themselves. They measure everything by the standard of man, by their society, which is ultimately subjective. Number 57, in science of philosophical training and morals, and also civil laws, may and ought to keep aloof divine ecclesiastical authority. Again, right and wrong has nothing to do with God. Will make a society without God. This is again common in the United States. No other forces are to be recognized except those which reside in matter, and of the rectitude and excellence of morality ought to be placed in the accumulation and increase of riches by every possible means of gratification and pleasure. So basically, if it makes you rich, it's morally okay. If it makes you pleasurable, gives you joy, it's okay. Yeah, basically every is social injustice, that even even on the woke left. Basically, this is essentially a license to do everything, even the woke left. If you think oppression of the poor, tearing up of rainforests and displacing of native tribes is wrong, which it is, and getting rich at the expense of exploiting workers, if you think that's wrong, then you have to agree the Catholic Church was right. If you agree that those things are wrong, then you have to agree that the Catholic Church was right to condemn this error. That's what it's condemning. 59. Right consists in a material fact. All human duties are empty word. And all human facts are the force of right. Essentially, this error number 59, if you did not condemn it as an error, would essentially say that the gulags, the Holocaust, were okay. Because Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin had, as a material fact, taken over all that land. They had physical control of those people, and therefore all their duties to them are just empty words. And that was their force of right. Therefore, they had a right to do what they did, however cruel it may be. Also because, hey, remember, error 39? That wonderful error? The state, as being the origin and source of all rights, is endowed to a certain right, not circumscribed by any limits. How dare Pius IX condemn the wonderful world of Nazism and communist gulags? Yeah. Authority is nothing else but numbers and total sum of material forces. Basically, I have the biggest stick, therefore I can beat you up. Like, condemned by the Catholic Church. Essentially, literally, on a schoolyard level thing, the bully has, the toughest bully in school has authority. Can beat people up because he can beat people up and get away with it, therefore he has authority to beat people up and do whatever he wants. And justice, that's condemned by the Catholic Church happily. 61, the injustice of an act, when successful, inflicts no injury on the sanctity of right. So long as you're successful, it's okay. Condemned by the Catholic Church, like, please, yeah. The Syllabus of Errors is controversial? How is any of this? Okay, certainly this section, the reading, how is this controversial? For anyone? How is it controversial that the Catholic Church condemned these errors? 60, the principle of non-intervention, as it is called, ought to be proclaimed and observed. Don't get involved in things. Stay out of it. How dare you get involved and tell me I can't put that person in the concentration camp? How dare you do that? Number 63, it is lawful to refuse obedience to legitimate princes and even to rebel against them. So I remember earlier before. So this is number 6. I remember earlier before where it talked about number 63 and 39. Again, coming back to error number 39. State is the origin of all rights, has no limits to power. That's one extreme. You can't do that. However, guess what? Yes. It is lawful to refuse to obey legitimate princes and even to rebel against them. Yes, you have to obey the government. If it's a legitimate government, and by the way, most governments are legitimately recognized, you are bound to obey them. You gotta obey civil law. Sorry, that means, sorry, January 6th, sorry, trucker convoy want to overthrow Trudeau. That you can certainly think Biden sucks, and I think you may well be right. Same thing with Trudeau, definitely. I live in Canada, but you still have, unless they're telling you to do something that's contrary to God's law, and unless that's going on, yeah, you're not allowed to rebel against them. You have to obey them. That is Catholic teaching. The Catholic Church generally frowns on trying to overthrow the government. Any government. The violation of any solemn oath, as well as any wicked and frivolous action repugnant to eternal law, is not only not blameworthy, but altogether lawful and worthy the highest praise when done through love of country. So basically it's, we don't like what the government is doing. We can overthrow the government. So basically this whole section is like, we don't like what the government is doing. We can overthrow the government. And just like, it's insane. It's saying we don't like the government, we could just overthrow it. And church stay out of it. We can overthrow the government. If we can bash anyone over the head, we'll do it. And how dare you say we think that? Tell us that's wrong to not to be. How dare you tell us it's wrong to be dishonest? Ignore all honesty and integrity, and try to take over the church, and silence any opposition with violence. Because we're strong, we have a right to do that. How is this controversial? How is any of this controversial? Certainly not that section. I sure hope no one watching this thinks that previous section was remotely controversial. I hope anyone was listening to the previous section, and I hope anyone who thinks that any of those errors were a good idea, even remotely, the previous section, is put in asylum personally. Sounds like a dangerous, crazy, horrible society in which to live in. God bless the Catholic Church. Even if I were not a Catholic, I would say, yes, good. The Catholic Church taught that. Good, the Catholic Church taught that previous section right here. Let's overthrow the government. We can do whatever we want because we're strong enough. We can disobey the law. Anyone who tells us we're wrong is evil because we're strong. Are you sure you believe in evolution, not devolution? Section number 8. Errors concerning Christian marriage. Doctrine that Christ raised marriage with the dignity of sacrament cannot at all be tolerated. But God has joined, no one then put asunder. Literally in the gospel. Literally in the gospel. If God made Adam and Eve in any fashion, whether it's the evolution or otherwise, then yes, God invented marriage. So yes, since he made it, yes, he has jurisdiction over it. Sacrament of marriage is only a something necessary to the contract and separate from it. And the sacrament itself consists in the neutral benediction. No, the marriage thing that God does, that is literally in the Bible. Like, if you're Christian, like, you can see the problem with this. It's like state worship, essentially. It is. No, it is. By the law of nature, marriage is not indissoluble. In many cases, divorce probably is called, maybe decreed by civil authority. No, you can't get divorced. Again, but God has joined, let no one put asunder. Like, this is literally like basic gospel. If you're a Christian of any sort and believe that you can get divorced, you do not believe in the Bible. You do not believe in what God has revealed. Period. The church has not the power of establishing direct impediments to marriage. But such things belong to civil authority alone, by which existing impediments are to be removed. So basically, hey, if this government tells you can marry your cousin, even though the church says it's wrong, that's okay. In the Dark Ages, the church began to establish direct impediments. Yes, by saying in the Dark Ages when the church forbade people from marrying their cousins. In dark times, you cannot make out and have children with your cousin. Not by her own right, but by using power borrowed from the state. How dare the church usurp authority from government and tell people not to marry their cousins? Where would the church get such a tyrannical idea from? The canons of the Council of Trent, which anathematize those who say... Okay, number 70. The canons of the Council of Trent, which anathematize those who dare deny the church the right of establishing direct impediments, either are not dogmatic or must be understood as referring to such borrowed power. No, they're dogmatic. Matters of faith and morals apply to ecumenical councils, just like the Pope. It was on a matter of faith and morals. Intended as a matter of faith and morals. That was definitely what Trent was dealing with. That is the historical context. And Christ did tell them what you bind and loose. Bind and loose. Christ did give Peter the power to bind and loose into the whole church. People like Orthodox and Catholics may argue whether it was more to Peter specifically, the whole church, and the nuances there, but the church does have the power to say you cannot marry your cousin. And to make that law with or without the state's consent. It does have that power. Second, the form of solemnizing marriage prescribed by the Council of Trent under pain of nullity does not bind in cases where the civil law lays down another form. Again, what God has joined together, let no man put asunder. What God has joined together, no man put asunder. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. I love my mother, but my mother always told me, growing up, that it's the civil authority that marries you. The church just blesses it. Here's the thing. As a kid, I actually read the Bible, and I read the part which said, "What God has joined," in reference to marriage, that no man put asunder. What God has joined, no man put asunder. Benefits Boniface IX was the first to declare the vow of chastity taken at ordination. Boniface IX was the first who declared that the vow of chastity taken at ordination renders the marriage void. Yeah, because you're previously contracted to not get married. You're breaking a vow. You can't enter another vow. It conflicts. You've already committed yourself to something else. Like, you need... I think you can actually, if you make one of the vows, you can be released from it, but you can be released from it, get married, but you have to be dispensed from it. Like, you made a previous commitment. Like, even in... Like, you have a previous contract that doesn't allow you into another contract, so it's... kind of makes sense. Or why that will be the law. And a force of merely... in the force of a merely civil contract, there may exist between Christians a real marriage. And it's false to say either that the marriage contract between Christians is always a sacrament, or that there is no contract and the sacrament be excluded. So talking about Christians to go before just a judge to get married. Which, by the way, if you're a Catholic, you are supposed to go before a priest. Period. Even if you've been living in sin, even if you are not that good at Christians, that is what the Catholic Church expects of you. I'm from a Protestant background, and they're much of Protestant history, actually. If you're not living the proper Christian life, just living common law is considered appropriate, which I completely disagree with theologically. But yeah, like, again, but merely enforcement of merely civil contract. What God has joined, let no man put asunder. What God has joined, no man put asunder. That's literally the gospel. Well, the civil state, what God has joined, God trumps government. Why? Because he's literally God. Only in America, only in the American Revolutionary's mind. And modernist Freemasons, even the Romans thought that the authority of the gods trumped theirs. They who tried to negotiate and pick which gods, they thought that they had to keep all the gods happy in ancient Rome, or as many as they could. There are actually cases in the history of Syllabus of Caesarea where persecutions on Christians were lifted because they were going to war and they didn't want the Christian god mad at them, helping the enemy. But God has joined, let no man put asunder. Matrimonial causes and spouses belong by their nature to civil tribunals. Okay, I've said it before, I'll say it again. What God has joined, let no man put asunder. What God has joined, let no man put asunder. What God has joined, let no man put asunder. Well, the government says, well, the judge says, the law of the land says, God trumps civil authority. Get it through six skulls. The man who, the guy who created the entire friggin' universe. And everything, and the established laws of science. His laws kind of trump your local laws on a particular speck of land, on a particular speck that's in the speck of a galaxy, of a speck of the universe, that's in a speck of infinity and eternity, which is all subject to Almighty God who made all these laws. Well, God is not bound by the law of gravity. He is not bound by civil tribunals, and his laws trump yours. Secularists. Stupid. And okay, I can see you believing this as an atheist, maybe. Maybe if you were an atheist, I could see believing this fine. But Christians, there are Christians who think this stuff makes sense. I met them, especially quite common among Protestants. Sadly, among many more lax like Catholics, and no, God's law trumps it. Study it, believe it, obey it. God's law comes first. Heirs turning the civil power of the Roman Pontiff. The civil power of the Roman Pontiff. 75. 76. The children of the Christian and Catholic Church are divided amongst themselves about the compatibility of the temporal and spiritual power. No, they are not. The abolition of the temporal power which the Apostolic See is possessed would contribute the greatest degree to liberty and prosperity of the Church. Yeah, because as we know, when Hitler invaded Rome and surrounded the Vatican, and rather than having an entire small, mini, properly sized mini country that he would have to have upset the entire Catholic world to invade, it made so much more freedom that for Hitler to it made it so much harder for Hitler to oppress the Roman population by the fact that he just had to surround this tiny university campus-sized city-state and just march in and kidnap the Pope if he wanted to. Like, that has not played out well. That has not played out well one bit. Number 10, we're almost done. Having reference to modern liberalism. In the present day, it is no longer expedient that the Catholic religion should be held as the only religion of the state, the exclusion of all the forms of worship. So, no separation of church and state. Yes, and I should promote, as far as possible, the state recognizing the Catholic Church, the Big C Catholic Church, traditional Catholicism, as the one true religion of law of the land, recognized as such by civil authority. Hence, it is wisely decided by law in some Catholic countries and that persons coming in to reside therein shall public exercise their own particular worship. Again, freedom of religion, condemned as such, as we know, condemned by the Catholic Church. 79. Moreover, it is false that the civil authority, liberty, of every form of worship, and full power given to all, overtly and publicly manifesting any opinions whatsoever and thoughts, conduce more easily to corrupt the morals and minds of the people and propagate the pest of indifferentism. Okay, these two are unpopular. This one said the condemnation of error 77 says the state should say the Catholic Church is the only true religion, and number 78 says that the Catholic Church should put in practice that no, the Catholic Church is the only one that should have faith, that should have full liberty exercise as it, however darn well pleases. 79. However, yeah, I gotta say, it has definitely corrupted morals. Bringing all these different religions won't and separating church and state won't corrupt morals. It did. Full on. It did. And even the people who were taught this error to begin with, if they could see the world today, would say, what the fudge? Almost certainly. It has led to people being different and like, oh, Catholicism, you can be the same religion, who cares? The point where people are largely irreligious. People are now largely religious in my area. And those who warned and said that if you have separation of church and state and bring in every heretical opinion and give it free rein, it'll lead to indifferentism and lack of morals, have been proven right. Like, even the United States, I'm Canadian. I think American gun laws are barbaric. Sorry to any American here watching. That being said, American gun advocates are correct that when things were more strictly, rigidly Christian, you had less gun violence. I don't think many people would challenge that. And because people are now more taught to be different from morals of religion in schools, thou shalt not kill, which is one of the 10 Commandments, which they are now taught to ignore and is bad, is not being faithfully observed. And now we have state worship and radical racism, which did exist before, was problematic, but it just has compounded over time. 80. The Roman Pontiff can and ought to reconcile himself and come to terms with progress, liberalism, and modern civilization. Come to terms with the progress of being Christian but abandoning the gospel. Embracing things that improve it, embracing an ideology that has been proven to lead to indifferentism. And basically accept belief systems that say you can literally have government state worship and the government can tyrannize its people under it simply because it can. And that it's okay that it does so. Thank good. I think anything, a more accurate statement that should have been made by these people is the Roman Pontiff isn't reactionary enough. That we need to chuck modern progress and liberalism and modern civilization. It is that has become a cesspool. The faith teaches us. So this is what the Pope actually has to say about these things. Pius IX, beatified by the Vatican II Church, I might add. So he is all around regarded as being a holy Pope. The faith teaches us, and human reason demonstrates that a double order of things exists, and we must therefore distinguish between two earthly powers. One in the natural origin, which provides for secular affairs and the tranquility of human society. The other of a supernatural origin, i.e. the Church, which presides over the city of God, let's say the Church of Christ, which has been divinely instituted for the sake of souls and for eternal salvation. Views of the twofold power are most wisely ordered such a way that God has given us what is God's, because of God to Caesar what is Caesar's, who is great because he is smaller than heaven. Certainly the Church has never disobeyed this divine command. The Church has always never instructed the faithful to show the respect they should inviolably have for the supreme authority and its secular rights. So obey the Church, and you obey civil authority in its proper order. Venerable brethren, you see clearly enough how sad the full perils of the condition of the Catholics in the regions of Europe, which we have mentioned, nor are things any better, nor circumstances calmer in America, where some regions are so hostile to Catholics that their governments seem to deny by their actions the Catholic faith they claim to profess. Talking about North America and the Americas, the two continents. Back there, for the last few years, a ferocious war of the Church, its institution, the rights of the Apostolic See have been raging. Venerable brothers, it is surprising that in our time, such a great war is being waged against the Catholic Church. But anyone who knows the nature, desires, intentions of the sects, whether they be called Masonic or bear another name. By the way, Benjamin Franklin was a Freemason, absolutely. I read his autobiography. He was definitely involved in some sort of his secret society and was definitely a deist, and was literally involved in revolutions. He was definitely a Mason. Comparison with the nature and the systems and the vast obstacles by which the Church has been assailed almost everywhere. Cannot doubt that the present misfortune must mainly be imputed to the frauds and machinations of these sects. It is from them that the synagogue of Satan, which gathers its troops against the Church, takes its strength. The past, our predecessors, vigilant even from the beginning in Israel, had already denounced them to the kings and the nations, had condemned them time and again. Even we have not failed in our duty, if those would have been able to avert such deadly scourge had only had more faith, the supreme pastors of the Church. But this scourge, winding through sinuous caverns, deceiving many with astute frauds, finally has arrived at the point where it comes forth impetuously from its hiding places and triumphs as a powerful master. Since the throng of its propagandists has grown enormously, these wicked groups think they have already become masters of the world. They have almost reached their pre-established goal, having sometimes obtained what they desired, and that power in civilized countries they boldly term the help of powers and authorities which they have secured, trying to submit the Church of God to the most cruel servitude. So I'll try to link it down below, but this is definitely a matter of faith and morals. It is definitely dealing with a matter of faith and morals here, that this is condemned. These errors are definitely condemned. Sadly, this is what our society is based off of now. And I want to point that out because, especially when voting, we need to remember that whoever we vote for, when we vote liberal or conservative, we are voting for someone who is contrary to God's law. We should not get overly enthusiastic about Donald Trump or Kamala Harris. Ultimately, people like Kamala Harris or Donald Trump, or in Canada, Poilievre versus Trudeau, are ultimately two sides of the same coin. They're not opposite. They're opposites in the sense they are two sides of the same coin. They are not, neither of them are Catholic solutions, and we should reject each and every one of them. And even when picking lesser of two evils, we need to really think about the Syllabus of Errors. Think about all the things this decree had to say about the abuse of freedom. So, like, for example, the president is no longer, this section here, you cannot have this excessive amount of freedom on matters of religion, and the state is right to put down a certain extent, the modern notion of religious freedom. Furthermore, you can rebel against the government if they get tyrannical. No, you can't have a revolution against civil authority. A lot of these things are errors. Similarly, there's another extreme with authoritarianism. You've got to resist that as well. This error here, number 39, is well condemned. May not have all the rights that it may be wrong to give people all the rights that people say the state should have, or that individuals should have, but we do have rights. And it's worth becoming aware, and it's worth educating ourselves what those rights are. And even, by the way, I have studied, this is just an overview of the syllabus, yes, followers of non-Catholic religions do have certain rights. I think St. Thomas Aquinas goes into more detail on that score. Not all religions are equal or the same, but it is based on, but there is overall arching belief in love of God and love of neighbor. Talk about the fundamentals of Catholic dogma as well by Ludwig Ott. But yeah, just be aware of it, and don't just say, well, at least this government is conservative. Sometimes the thing that the conservative government might be doing may be the thing that's making conservative, it might be contrary to Catholic faith. Like freedom cult is not in line with the Catholic faith. And even if you're authoritarian, well, the way the government may be authoritarian may be crushing freedom cult, but might be doing it in a way that does take away people's legitimate rights. So it is worth, if you're going to be a political creature, and humans tend to be political creatures, particularly in democracies, especially in the United States, please stop sharing all your political opinions online all the time. Reread the Syllabus of Errors and examine every party. Make a list of everything they do wrong. Put them all on trial before you support any of them. Read other encyclicals, Quas Primus, Rerum Novarum, etc. The Decree Against Communism, the Decree Against Freemasonry. I hope to film some videos on these topics, on those encyclicals a little later on. But educate yourself. Go over these documents before you hold any opinion. Embrace any opinion, because a lot of these deal with political errors. This decree deals with a lot of political errors, but also, while we're waiting, let's not forget a lot of these sections, notably here, especially here, this section here, we are not free to practice every religion we want. You cannot be saved in any religion. We cannot attain eternal hope for the salvation of those. Cannot entertain hope for the salvation of those outside the true Church of Christ. And Protestantism is not a salvific religion. That is the teaching of the Church. Even if you don't get politically active in the Church, this has an effect. This matters, even in a private church setting. And this does matter to you. Why? Because you are your brother's keeper. You are to care if your neighbor is going to HELL. And you are to work for the salvation of your fellow man, your neighbor. Anyway, God bless. If you get a chance, check out an SSPX chapel. Check out an SSPX church if you ever get a chance. And please, let's send this to three Aves. Ave Maria, gratia plena Dominus tecum, benedictus et benedictus Virtus tu Iesus, sanctum Deo pro nobis, peccatoribus nobis nostri, amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena Dominus tecum, benedictus et benedictus Virtus tu Iesus, sanctum Deo pro nobis, peccatoribus nobis nostri, amen. Ave Maria, gratia per Dominus tuum, benedictus et benedictus Virgus Virtus Jesu, Sanctum Mater Dei pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostre. Amen. Nomine Patris, Filii, Spiritus Sancti.